Hey guys, for this video, I'll showcase 9 tricks for teamfight tactics that you could use in every single game. This video has a mix of both beginner and advanced tricks. I bet that even challenger players don't even know about tip number 7. These tips can also be used indefinitely as they are not patch or set specific. Without further ado, let's get right into this. Tip number 1, despite there being 8 players in a game, you could only face 7 opponents every round, and if you use this trick, you'll be able to narrow it down from 7 players you could potentially face down to 3. So let's get into how to do that, because it does get a little tricky. So in the beginning of the game, your opponents are completely random. However, once you face 4 opponents, you'll have 3 players that you haven't faced yet, meaning that for your next game, there will only be 3 possible opponents. For example, if you are player 8 and you face Person 1 in round 1, Person 2 in round 2, 3, and 4. In round 5, you'll be able to only face 3 different opponents, which is opponent 5, 6, and 7. You can continue this process by keeping track of each opponent you've played throughout the whole game to always have it narrowed down to 3 potential opponents. In simpler terms, you just can't face the past 4 people that you face. So as long as you keep track of all the names of people you've played against in the past, you'll be able to narrow down your next 3 opponents, which makes scouting a lot easier. Let's say you have a Zephyr that you want to position, or maybe you want to put in specific synergies to counteract certain matchups. Being able to narrow down from 7 opponents to 3 makes this process much simpler. This whole system changes whenever a player gets eliminated. For example, when there are only 7 people left in the game, you'll only be able to face 3 opponents still, but instead of not being able to face the past 4 opponents, you can't face the past 3 people. When the next person gets eliminated from the game and there are only 6 players left, you only have 5 opponents, but you can't face the last 2 that you face, again leaving 3 potential opponents. Now if there are only 5 people in the game, the same thing happens. You have 4 potential opponents, but only 3 that you could face per round, so you can't face the last player that you've recently faced. Personally, this trick has helped me win a ton of games, but it does get a little complicated once people die and, for example, people are facing ghosts, because that complicates the system a tiny bit. Tip number 2 revolves around gold efficiency. During stage 3 and beyond, if you can level up and keep around 30 gold, you probably should. This assumes that you do not need to roll any gold to find your composition after leveling up. For example, if you are level 5, it costs you 20 gold to reach level 6. That means if you have 50 or more gold, you should probably just go ahead and level up to level 6 and go down to 30 gold in order to save your health, because you do not actually lose that much gold by leveling in this manner. We all know that every 10 gold you gain 1 interest gold, capping out at 50 gold gaining 5 interest. So when you spend 20 gold on that level up and go from 50 gold to 30 gold, you only really lose 2 gold for that round and 1 gold the next round, meaning you lose 3 gold overall. However, having a stronger team by having an extra person and having higher odds of hitting stronger units from the level up heavily outweighs this 3 gold payment. Same story if you're reaching level 7 or level 8. Now from going from level 6 to level 7, it costs 32 gold to level up instead of 20. Again, you could use the same exact principles as we talked about before. If you can level up and still keep 30 gold, for example, if you have 62 gold and you have 30 gold needed to level up, just go ahead and spend that gold and then you'll be at level 7, lose out on 3 gold, but get an extra unit for that round to deal more damage to your opponents or save your life in case you prevented a loss, and you get access to better units for 2 extra turns. Now, my next tip has to do with rolling. If you have 4 more pairs, you should probably roll until you complete at least one of them or meet the next interest threshold. For example, if you're at 38 gold and you have 4 pairs on your bench, meaning that you have 1-star units on the board and a copy of that 1-star on your bench, and you have 4 of those units, go ahead and roll down to 30 gold in order to try to complete your pairs. Hitting any one of these units greatly strengthens your board, allowing you to save health, and also you're not actually losing out on any sort of interest because you're still going to gain the 3 interest gold for that round. Next, let's talk about items. If you have 4 or more item components, it's generally a good idea to just build at least 1 item. The reason behind this is that if you leave your items unbuilt for too long, you're going to be pretty weak in the fights and lose every round until the carousel or the neutral round, where you get an additional item to hopefully help your team. However, some of you guys may be asking, what if none of these items can be built for my composition? Well, if that's the case, you want to go ahead and build versatile items that work for any composition. I have a list of those items on my website, which I update every Friday at bunnymuffins.lol/meta, where I have a tier list and go over which items are the best and worst based on their versatility and strength. Speaking of items, tip number 5, items on the 5th carousel, which is stage 5, are always a full item, and items on stage 6 is some fully built items and some item components. That means after you kill the neutral rounds on stage 4, you won't get any other item components for quite a while, so you probably should build every item that you can during that round. And if you have an odd number of items where you can't use every item component, you can potentially save that item for the carousel in stage 6. But that's a little far away, so you can't really plan around that. My next tip comes before the game even starts. If you want to climb, you need to optimize your strategies. Before every game, you should write down compositions and strategies that work on each map, because every map is different in Teamfight Tactics. This way you'll know which items to go for in the beginning of the game, and you'll know what sort of team compositions work better on that map. That doesn't necessarily mean you'll always play certain compositions on certain maps, but it'll give you a good idea of what's generally slightly better or worse. Now onto tip number 7, and again, this is a tip that I think that not even a lot of other challenger players might know. We all know that we should be scouting as often as we can afford to. However, I've noticed that it's pretty difficult to scout during a fighting round because everyone isn't on their home boards because they're fighting a different player. When encountering this scenario, I've often heard players just say something like, oh, I'll just scout after the round ends. However, I have a quick trick that allows you to scout to know every composition that each player is going, and that is by using hotkeys and only focusing on one part of your screen. So when you flip around to other players using scouting hotkeys, I personally use Q and R. You can quickly move around the map and see what units and compositions your opponents are going, what type of items they build, and what type of units they're holding on their bench, as well as what synergies they have on the left-hand side. However, when a fight starts, the map often gets disoriented based on which board you go to when you scout. So a trick that I've found that's really useful is only look at the bottom half of your screen and don't even scout the top part of the board. That way you can cleanly flip through everyone on the map, get an idea of what synergies they're going for, get an idea of what items they're going for, without double counting any opponents and without getting too confused. My last 2 tips are around playstyle. Tip number 8, if you're a flexible player, don't stress about going for the strongest composition or the uncontested composition. Instead, I suggest going for what the game gives you. A lot of people who say they play flexibly always go for uncontested compositions, but end up forcing those uncontested compositions. If you're forcing an uncontested composition, are you actually being a flexible player? I know that some of these players, they scout around the boards and see that no one's going for this specific composition, but if you're not going what the game gives you, you're not actually being a flexible player. Sometimes you can't even go for an uncontested comp because even if it's uncontested, the game doesn't give you those champions. That means if you're a flexible player, always try to go for what the game gives you instead of forcing uncontested compositions. My last tip revolves around 2 strategies, forcing or flexing. I suggest you only stick with one of them. The reason behind this is if you're a flexible player, you might not be as familiar with every composition as someone who truly mastered only one composition, but whenever you go for that composition, you're going to be able to play that game while having strong starts with that composition or having perfect items. Whereas the force player has to play that same comp every game even if they don't get the right items or even if they don't have all the units required for their composition. However, the flexible player is punished because, again, they're not as familiar with all the nuances of every composition, so whenever some weird scenarios happen, those players won't be able to take advantage of those nuances in order to gain an advantage throughout the course of a game. For example, if there are a lot of different strategies for a composition on different maps, the flexible player might not be as familiar with all of these as not everyone has time to master every single composition in the game. The advantages of being a forcing player is that you'll never get confused during the game, which means that you'll have more time to do all the other fundamentals of teamfight tactics to gain an advantage throughout the course of the game. This includes more time to scout, more time to roll, and more time to strategize about positioning. Second, you'll know how to handle every single situation that's given to you for that specific composition, which means that you can probably play that comp in any scenario. You'll know what to do in rare situations such as getting 2 force of natures. You'll know what to do when you get weird item components and what items are maybe not perfect items but still playable items. And you'll know what to do when you don't hit certain champions to 2-star. However, the drawbacks of forcing a composition are pretty obvious. Sometimes you'll get a lot of 8th places because the game sometimes doesn't give you a very key champion every game. This is going to happen every now and then, but this shouldn't dissuade you from trying to force a comp every single game. Next is that sometimes your items may be weaker than you would like because, again, sometimes the neutral camps don't drop specific items and sometimes you don't get the best pick on Carousel. But again, since you have more time to focus on the fundamentals of teamfight tactics and you know what to do in every situation for that composition, you're not too far held back by these disadvantages. Those are my 9 tips for teamfight tactics. Let me know about a tip that you didn't know about before this that helped you out in your next game, or leave a comment if you have a tip similar to one of these that I forgot about here. This isn't a comprehensive list of tips in TFT, but I tend to use a lot of these in a lot of my games. If this video helped you get to the next rank, go ahead and leave a like. Go ahead and check me out on my other social media such as Twitch, Twitter, and Instagram. I'll see you guys next time. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to share and subscribe, and of course smash that like button. Each like is an LP I gain before the next video.